I would now like to introduce Margaret Doyle, Head of Financial Services at Deloitte and regular contributor to the BBC and former Reuters journalist, as chair of our next panel.
Thank you very much, Samantha. I'm thrilled to be here for this really important subject, and my thanks to the Embassy of Japan for their support for this event. And I'm also delighted to have such a distinguished panel. The way in which this panel will work is a little bit similar to the one before coffee. We're going to invite each of our panelists to speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to discussion and to questions from the floor. So let me introduce our panelists. On my right is Barbara Rambousek, who is Associate Director for Economic Inclusion at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, also known as the EBRD. On my left is Vandita Pant, who's the Group Treasurer and Head of Europe for BHP Billiton, the miner. And then on my far left is Lynn Collier, who's the COO for Hitachi Data Systems. So with no more ado, Barbara, if I can turn to you, and if you can maybe talk to me about the way in which the EBRD is trying to promote gender equality.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we've been on a journey already this morning. We started looking at young women, girls, really looking at educational choices and the parameters that inform those choices. What I would like to look at a little bit more is the next step. So I think, have seen that, luckily, maybe with the exception for physics, quite a lot of girls already choose STEM subjects. And so there is a large number, and sometimes even more girls than boys, graduating, both at vocational levels but also at tertiary levels in STEM subjects. The question is, what happens after? So there's a huge drop-off between girls getting the education and then actually entering employment, staying in that employment, and ultimately having very successful careers. So what do we do about that? At the EBRD, we are a private sector focused bank. We invest in companies across Central Asia, Turkey, North Africa, and Eastern Europe to achieve sustainable market economies. And one of the qualities of such sustainable market economies is that they are inclusive, so that they create economic opportunities, jobs and skills and entrepreneurship opportunities for women, for young people, for people in less developed regions. Now we take a very proactive approach in working directly with our clients to open up these economic opportunities. One of the key challenges that we see our clients facing is in relation to skills mismatch. And we've undertaken quite a bit of work to better analyze in which sectors, in which type of skills, and how we can help them address that. And by doing that, by addressing those business challenges, also creating routes into jobs, routes into skills, training opportunities, and ultimately careers for young women, for girls. Just to give you some examples, in Russia, 25% of companies report that there's the skills mismatch is a major business obstacle that doesn't allow them to expand, to innovate. In the Kyrgyz Republic, the rate is 33%. In Mongolia, it's 23%. So this skills issue is a huge business challenge. At the same time, in Turkey, for example, 1.2 million jobs could not be filled in 2015 because candidates did not have the right skills. So at EBRD, what we're trying to do is we try to broker and bring those two sides together through a number of different activities where clients need expertise to help them address those skills mismatch issues. We actually help them to improve the local training provision that they have in-house, bring in international best practice and expertise in technical subjects, for example, particularly manufacturing sectors or in power and energy or in natural resources, to help them improve the local training and, very importantly, the partnerships with local schools, with universities, with vocational schools. And then in this context, to look at workforce diversity. So for companies to go out and really make careers in their sectors attractive to girls, to women, and importantly, their families. So one of the cornerstones of these programs is the career advice that companies themselves can provide. And we work with them to find mechanisms that go beyond the sort of one-off going into a school and giving a presentation, but actually coming up with partnerships between companies, sometimes between groups of companies and schools at the vocational level and at the tertiary level, to really come up with sustainable and successful career advice programs, to showcase what does a career in automotive manufacturing look like in Turkey, what opportunities are there from the entry level and then up into management. So in this context, we look at the glass ceiling, the sort of horizontal but also the vertical glass ceiling. We help companies to expand opportunities for women, not only in the sort of traditional areas within the company, but also into non-traditional areas, into technical areas, into technical disciplines, through equal opportunity approaches. Building on that, we then add a policy component whereby we actually create an engagement between companies and education systems, education institutions, and policymakers to improve skill standards, to improve models that exist in relation to apprenticeships, in relation to internships, traineeships, to really highlight the need for young women to, or the opportunities actually that young women can have in this context, to understand the roots and the career opportunities that they have, or that they could have in this context. So we currently have about 200 projects where our clients are interested in working with us on establishing those equal opportunity models and working with the schools and with the universities to enhance the number of women and to strengthen their workforce diversity. Initially, sometimes the targets are quite modest. We have automotive firms, for example, in Turkey, where at the moment it's only 0.5% women that work in vocational disciplines at the shop floor. And so we are working with these companies to gradually raise the number of women to 5%, 10%. Now this doesn't look very much in the grand scheme of things, but it's a gradual process and it's about establishing the policies and also the business case for the companies to really engage in this process with the schools and with the families themselves.
Great, thank you very much. Vandita, you've had an interesting career, worked in many different Asian countries, worked in banking until about a year ago, so you've seen many different cultures, you've seen different industries, so and you've now you've gone from one male-dominated industry to one that is even more male-dominated.
You have to challenge it all, isn't it?
Yeah. So lessons learned from your own career, and also BHP Billiton, I understand, has got huge programs in terms of gender equality as well. So.
Sure. Thanks, Margaret. Yes, so I'm just a word on BHP Billiton. For those of you who don't know us, we are the largest global resources company in the world. We are among the world's biggest producers of iron ore, copper, metallurgical coal, uranium, and we have substantial interest in oil and gas across the world. So I'm very proud to be speaking at this from what, as Margaret mentioned, can be seen as a very traditional male-dominated industry player, if you will. My own experience, again, Margaret mentioned it. I studied and grew up in India, worked in Singapore, was in Japan for 3 years as a chief risk officer for a bank, looking at South Korea and Japan, the senior most woman in 350 strong employee workforce in Japan, of which the next senior woman was a clerk, and there were only 5 women in the business. So I have some stories to share, but very positive experiences as well of finally getting recognition of bringing value to the table. And I think we should not underestimate the power of good outcomes to changing mindsets and culture within the organization. So coming back to BHP Billiton, where I joined just a year back, having worked in the city of London for 10 odd years after my Japan stint, we are fully convinced about the gender balance, opportunities, and the outcomes which are critical. And because we have our own data to prove it, our own 10 most inclusive sites, and these are mine sites, are on average better performers vis-a-vis the company average on almost all KPI matrix that we look at. For example, production, cost efficiencies, staff engagement, and safety, the most important one for us. And these inclusive sites have performed roughly 15% higher on accuracy of production forecasting and up to 68% higher on injury rates, reduction in injury rates. And for a mining company, natural resources company, this is the top priority. And hence, it is absolutely logical from a business case perspective that we aspire that these inclusive site culture and the practices is something that we transplant across our industry. So there is a wider societal case for it, but business case from our perspective is absolutely clear. We are a company of engineers, and it's very clear. You show the data, and why wouldn't we want to replicate the culture and the outcomes of our most inclusive sites into our whole company? So how did we get started on it? With commitment from the top. Our CEO heads our Diversity and Inclusion Council, and last year we have taken what some will call a very bold step, and we acknowledge is a aspirational and ambitious goal of saying that we will strive for a gender balance approach through the organization by 2025, and we have publicly announced it. How ambitious and challenging this goal is, to put it in perspective, let me share with you some of the stats of our workforce for last financial year. Last financial year, out of our total workforce, only 17%, 17% were women. In our senior most levels, we do better. Our board level, we have 27% representation of females, and in the senior executive leadership team is 33%. However, we were very conscious that we needed to accelerate the change at the full company level from a gender balance perspective, and sought to draw a line in the sand and set a goal. We know that our progress will be tracked. To say from 17% we are aspiring to be 50-50 by 2025 is a bold goal. But we also announced it with exactly that outcome, that we actually wanted to be there publicly, because we do believe that whatever gets measured and gets disclosed gets better understood and gets acted upon. And that's exactly the idea. What we have done post announcing the aspirations is that included in our KPIs and the scorecards for the senior most leaders in the company, aspiration to contribute to 3% increase in female workforce across the company on a yearly basis to get to our objective. Now I'll just talk about very specific priorities that we have set for ourselves for 2017 to enable us to reach this goal. The first priority is to embed flexible working practices. And I'm linking a few things to the panelists earlier that we heard about. We think having flexible working practices is an absolute hallmark of an inclusive workplace. And it actually brings a broader talent pool, not only from a recruitment, but from retention perspective as well. For example, we have introduced job sharing in a very traditional train driver roles in Western Australia near our mines, where the rosters are being changed to accommodate that 9 drivers are sharing 4 roles, and some of these are women. Second priority is acknowledging, uncovering, and then mitigating bias. Bias in behavior and in our daily routines. As was mentioned, it's not only important to get women in, but to retain them and make the work environment such that they feel fully appreciated and at parity with their male colleagues. And in that respect, we are reviewing all our decision-making processes and policies around recruitment, succession, talent management, and performance management across the company. And I must say what is really heartening, difficult but must be done, is encouraging very open conversations around the company, around bias and inclusion as part of the regular team discussions that leaders have. Really important to flesh that out. The third priority that we have set is to ensure that our brand as a company and in fact our industry is attractive to young women and they can aspire and they want to join us. I think it's fair to say that our industry has an image problem. In order to attract women, we need to break some stereotypes. Having worked in different cultures, I can attest to it that actually optics do matter and perceptions do shape reality. And hence, we are spending, and you will see us spending more and more time in actually breaking and shaking very embedded, deep-seated stereotypes on what does it take to work in our industry and lead in our industry. We need to show that you can be different looking and lead in our industry and do that effectively. The fourth priority that we are quite focused on is building inclusion and diversity across our supply chain. This is going beyond just within the company, but to our overall supply chain, which is very important in natural resources, as it's very integrated and linked. We want to ensure that our supply partners are aligned to our operations and our aspirations as well. And in a systematic approach, we are working to establish the baseline of where we are in that journey from our supply-based perspective, and are hoping that we will be able to publish something from next year onwards on supply chain as well. Just taking it a notch down to real world in our operations, lots of initiatives going ahead there to encourage different roles being filled by more diverse workforce. I'll give you an example that we have recently opened a new rail car maintenance center in Western Australia for our iron ore operations, which historically was a brute force role. You need to be changing wheels of trains and require just physical presence, physical strength. By consciously using technology in the design of our new maintenance shop, we have actually changed the way the requirements of this role will work. The tools are lighter, they are suspended from the wires, and physical strength requirement of that role has gone. And just to tell you that one of the leaders in that shop, in that maintenance shop, is actually a woman, and we are staffing it up to be a very diverse workforce. We are also increasing use of what we call IROCs, Integrated Remote Operating Centers, which actually use automation and equipment like haul trucks remotely. So these are the places where these remote operations are in the middle of an urban center, Brisbane or Perth, and actually are controlling the equipment in the remote mining areas in Australia. What this does is it opens up opportunities to staff these centers into from very different talent pools, untapped talent pools. And we have gone to ex-air controllers, signaling experts, to seek out different people. And one of those things, all these changes are attracting highly talented and skilled women into the kind of roles which were never open or were never sought out by the women. We have talked about STEM a lot, and that is a bedrock of expertise needed for a resources company. Our BHP Billiton Foundation is participating and investing in projects which go all the way down to encouraging women to study STEM subjects and showing the kind of role profiles that can exist in an industry like ours. I would just sum it up by saying identifying best practices and learning from each other, I think is absolutely core to the journey that we are on as an industry and as a company. So forums like these are invaluable opportunities for us to do just that. So it's through the combined efforts at the company level and at the industry level and policymakers, I think, that we'll be able to redress the balance of gender participation, which of course leads to economic empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vandita. Lynn, you're also working in a technology industry, Japanese headquartered. So you can compare and contrast between the UK and Japan. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this space.
Sure, and I think, Margaret, it's really interesting. Some of the comments that we've heard already this morning, how we can see the interplay between government, policy frameworks, companies, organisations, and the education system, not even just at 14 to 16-year-old or university, but also much, much earlier. And I think there were some comments made in the last session about how we can enable careers advisors and careers counsellors in that sphere to be much more educated themselves about just simply the difference in the roles that are available. This discussion, I think, is highlighted. The activities that are happening are all highlighted because of the skills shortage. And I think once we start to think about it in terms of satisfying not just the needs of individuals, but also the businesses and the governments to find sustainable employment for the future, all the different changes in the world will actually come into play to help us do that. And I think we do have to take care of some of the smaller things, but we also have to work together to achieve it. And I heard this morning and I've read some of the documentation from the G7 Women's Initiative in developing STEM careers, those guiding principles. But three of the words that I think we do need to focus on are sustainable, inclusive, and equitable growth. You know, those are some things that if we have those as our guiding tenets, whether we're in education or we're in government looking at policy or we are in big corporations, if we have those things in mind, then we do take action in a different way. And we heard some of the WINS objectives as well, the focus on promoting STEM careers. It's vital that business takes the lead in reaching out and showcasing what the opportunity is, just what is available now. You know, a couple of years ago, I saw an advert on TV for one of the recruitment agencies, a little man charging around on a horse, being the saviour for everyone on a Monday. And he talked about, you, sir, you need to be a data scientist. Who on earth knew what a data scientist was 2 years ago? There are so many of these roles available, and it's incumbent on the organisations, it's incumbent on business to reach out and just talk about those things. Showcase the what can I do with my qualifications if I'm coming through the education system. It isn't just about those traditional engineering, medicine, legal professions, if we're looking at where we can actually use. I don't have a degree. I never thought I would be involved in technology. My background is very much sales, software enablement of applications. It's not about how to sell an engineering solution to a big business. But more and more these days, it's really exciting, and it's just absolutely the reason that, for me, I've spent 14 years as part of the Hitachi group of companies. And today it's even more fascinating and interesting to think about the kind of opportunities I could have moving forward. I had, in my earlier years, an absolutely unconditional support network from some of the managers that I worked with in sales. Typically men. Typically I was the only female in the sales room at that point in time. But their unconditional support gave me the confidence to aspire to doing different things. So I moved from an admin role into a fully fledged sales role. And now for me it's about giving back as well, showing that, you know, when women do get into positions of leadership, or to be able to showcase new opportunities, you don't rapidly pull up the ladder behind you, you're actually putting more ropes down for other people to climb up. And that really, I think, expands across the whole discussion area that we have in diversity. I look around some of the meetings that I go to, and let's just say the people in the room aren't the youngest. So, you know, diversity for me does include making sure that we're reaching out to the new superstars of the future as well as the female superstars. And today, obviously, we're here to focus on that economic female capability. We heard some discussion about role models. You know, for us at Hitachi, a big part of what we're doing is looking at how we can showcase the opportunity using role models, but then actually establishing networks where people who are new into the business or it's their first job, cross-group companies. You know, we have 900 different group companies at Hitachi. So there's a lot of opportunity, not just for me and the team inside HDS, Hitachi Data Systems, but also then thinking about those transferable skills to other group companies, be that in construction machinery or whether it's in the medical area. Hitachi Rail, you know, a couple of years ago we moved the headquarters of Hitachi Rail into the UK. First time that has ever been done. So this is all part of the Hitachi diversity agenda. The Hitachi Rail team here in the UK is led by Karen Boswell, recently awarded an OBE for her services to the rail industry. Fantastic role model for a lot of the people coming through the business. But she's also led initiatives working with government and other education establishments up in County Durham, where we're building our manufacturing site. For the first time, I think the end of last year, the government approval came through to actually set up in the northeast the first university technology college. So we're working in partnership with the education system, we're working in partnership with other providers in that area, car parts manufacturer, Hitachi Rail and the University of Sunderland, to put the curriculum together and staff that UTC. It will have places for some 600 16 to 19-year-olds. Now, obviously, the benefit for us at the end of it is like the car parts partner we're working with will have a readily available and trained workforce in the area. For the area, it's bringing great economic capability. They've also held specifically open days in the factory site for women only. So we have the open days for everyone, but we also had an open day that was just about women, because there seems to be still this belief that factories are dirty places, or you need physical strength to be able to undertake some of these roles. So some 90 local women came and visited the factory, had a tour and understood what it would be to work in the manufacturing site for Hitachi Rail. It's completely different than anybody would expect. It was great for them to be able then to go back to their communities, to their children, and say, hey, this is different. This is something that we could do differently. So really proud to be part of Hitachi and an organisation that not just in Japan is looking to redress the balance, and we've heard the stats this morning, we've got a lot of work to do in Japan, but equally the philosophy of Hitachi as a whole is that if we provide the right kind of environment to showcase the right kind of opportunities, and we do that globally across all of our group companies, we can start to see a shift in the trend. So we do have to have metrics and measures. I think it's really important to do that. Personally, I'm not a big fan of quotas, but I think if you can have KPIs in place that then show how you can deliver against some of those performance indicators that see the trend moving to a more diverse workforce, see more women in leadership, I think those are all the good things that we can underpin as a business. And also, you know, our strategy is underpinned by inspiring the next, social innovation, and so many more of the roles that our group companies are opening up in the technology space are attractive to women in a way that they wouldn't have been before. You know, something that we did recently, had the pleasure of being involved in a project we're doing with Beaconsfield High School. So we actually set out an art project for the 15 to 17-year-olds. But the whole underpinning ethos behind it was to showcase to them the kind of jobs that are available with an engineering company, Hitachi, but we actually wanted them to engage through the use of art. So the project was, and ended up with 3 different teams producing artwork, a big canvas, which is now displayed in our European headquarters, to say, what does social innovation mean to you? We talked to them a bit about the Hitachi philosophy, we talked to them a bit about what's happening in the market in general, and then it was their interpretation. And they awarded to us a big assembly, 600 girls, probably one of the most frightening experiences I've had in a long time. They awarded to us these murals that are now proudly displayed. And just the insight that these students had, having heard some of the pictures that we're giving to them, done some of the research on the web, and we've actually had now people coming back for work experience. So again, somebody mentioned earlier, work experience is really hard these days. So that's something we'll do again. It was a great experience for us. It was a worthwhile experience for the school, and the headmistress is very positive now about continuing further outreach. So I'm certainly going to introduce her to WISE and what's happening there. You know, these are things that I wasn't aware of until I got involved. And I think that's the thing. You know, we have a lot of things to do. One thing isn't the silver bullet to fix the world and redress the balance, but we all have to be accountable and we all have to play our part in it. And that's what I think is so exciting about the opportunity. And Hitachi is certainly doing a lot to facilitate those kind of things.
Okay, great. There were so many questions in to our former panelists that I would like to kind of just give you an opportunity to ask questions now. I've got a lot of questions for our panelists, but if we have, yes, a lady there, and the microphone is coming to you, and if you don't mind introducing yourself, please.
Hi, it's Manjari Prashar, and I'm with Cranfield University. I'm a researcher, and I also develop executive coaching through their executive education group. And I often work with women through middle management, going into senior management. So it's really interested to hear what the 2 organizations here have done in terms of the operational bits. Just would love to hear a little more about getting women into senior management, because what my understanding of that is tends to be quite opaque, the promotion process. That's where the classic old boys network tends to kick in. And have you, just want to know what you think about sponsors as opposed to role models. Like what our research has shown and what the work with the women I do has shown is that a lot of women do struggle with this notion of role models, and they tend to build composite role models. There's no one woman that really works for them. And so sometimes the promoting role models can backfire unless they have enough to choose from. However, sponsorship in terms of sort of the push and the pull within the groups tends to be more, positively seen by the women I work with. So I'd like to hear about your.
Great, so maybe Vandita, if you take it first, and then Lynn.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So on senior management, it's probably industry specific. I come from an industry in banking where that industry started with 50-50, starts with 50 and becomes a pyramid. By the time you get into a senior managing director level, I think my previous employer had 9% women at very senior level. In mining, unfortunately, it's a bit of a different problem that our company has, because our pipeline, the things that we have been talking about, operational roles and STEM requirement is such that pipeline itself is not diverse enough. So what tends to happen is that the skewness starts right at the end, at the beginning. And in a way, senior management, as I quoted in our executive leadership team, which is the top team in the company, 33% are women. Our board is 27%. So in one particular way, actually that's easier to fix than getting the whole pipeline, retaining the pipeline, and your point of actually managing that pipeline goes all the way through. And 2 issues there. One, fixing of systems. Systems seem like a boring fix, but it's absolutely critical to have recruitment, performance management, and talent management processes in company so transparent that opacity cannot come in. In terms of the issue, which is the second issue of sponsors versus role model, I can quite talk to that, because I've never had a single role model. I pick an attribute from this woman that I meet. that man that I meet and that third person that I listen to sometimes. And composite role model is what it's about. Unfortunately, if there are not enough women in the senior positions, it can come across as if you have only a type who can rise to the top, which is obviously unfair to women because we have all kinds of men as role models, to use the word loosely, whereas for women, there are only two visible, and they are of two kinds, and you can say, but that's not me. I don't know whether I can be that. And hence, as it becomes more diverse, I think it becomes easier to see yourself in the person who's talking to you. Sponsorship is important, and I think is more outcome-based, and hence can be more effective. I think mentoring is something which is more informal and can be instituted at a personal level, I would say.
And I agree with so many of those comments, Vandita. I think, to your point about role models, I think there is a requirement because there are so few women that, certainly from a recruitment perspective, one of the things that we did was we actually changed the language of our job descriptions. We changed the way that images were portrayed on our websites. We changed some of the sources that we went to for recruiting. And we also made sure that no matter who was coming in for a job, that during that interview process, they saw a mixture of people. Because very often, people were coming in and they would be interviewed by a very standardized set of professionals. So we've actively looked to change that across group companies and learn from the best that other people do. Sponsorship, I think, is absolutely critical. And to your point, Vandita, it's about really focusing in on the business outcomes. You know, I mentioned that I'm not a fan of quotas. I think what we need to really reinforce is that if you have the skills and you can deliver the goods, whatever the goods might be, that we need to showcase that talent. And having a sponsor who will help you do that absolutely is a great way to move things forward. We've actually established very proactively a set of mentoring circles as well across a variety of group companies. We do it usually geography based, so Hitachi group companies in the UK all share together these mentoring circles, and it's done on a volunteer basis for the mentors. So it's people who really want to be involved and make a difference, male, female, young, more established in careers. And they will take groups of people through a program over a 3 or 6 month period. And then during that time, we open up networks of other coaches that people can go to. We also want to ensure that we have virtual teams coming together to run innovation projects, because then we get the best that we can possibly get as a result as a business, but equally we showcase people who wouldn't normally network with other individuals, but they're doing that for a specific period of time on a particular project, so they get experience that way. I think it really is about the variety and just making sure that you do all of these things, not just once, because it's a good idea, but you embed it in the DNA of how you move the talent acquisition and management forward.
Barbara, did you want to come in on this?
Just very, very briefly, I talked earlier a bit more about what we do with our clients at EBRD, but obviously we also want to practice what we preach. So internally, we also have an inclusion and diversity group and a network called Connect for Women. And I think some of the key points are, for me, really in relation to networking and particularly mentoring. What we have internally in the bank is a program to help you select a mentor, to really be quite strategic about finding a mentor, maybe more than one, how to approach them, how to, in a way, present yourself as a mentee, but then equally also a program to teach you how to be a mentor. What does it mean to be a mentor? How can you actually help somebody progress in their career? What is the role of mentorship? And transparency in advertisements, both in terms of training opportunities and progression opportunities, placements within a company is another key milestone, or cornerstone really. So it's very similar to the others, but I think that this role of mentorship is very important.
I know we have a question in the second row here. The gentleman in the second row.
Thank Thank you. Arizman, the Commonwealth Business Women's Network. One of the best kept secrets in gender inequality is probably the 1%. You know, the 1% of women-owned businesses that do not get public sector contracts, that do not get private sector contracts. That figure, 1%. You know, we're familiar with the 30% of representation, but the figure of less than 1% is a truly horrific figure because it just goes to the lack of opportunity. So, you know, when Vandita, you talked about the work you're doing on supply diversity, I thought that was really important. I also think your role as a major company on the Australian Stock Exchange is also very important in signposting that to others. I just want to ask you about what are you doing in that area? The Commonwealth and the UN in recent months have both highlighted the central impact that on women's economic empowerment, the procurement can be as a driver, giving opportunities for smaller businesses. So I just wonder whether, are you looking at it not just from the perspective of supply diversity, but also of impact on the small business?
So, yeah, absolutely right. So from a supply chain management perspective, I'll use two kind of strands there, what we are doing. One is there is very much already a focus for us to support small and community suppliers, as we call them, in terms of our procurement bits. Not only that, our terms of payments sometimes are ring-fenced to ensure that small and community suppliers do not have to adhere to 60 days or 30 days supplier terms that we will insist that our suppliers give us. So we do enable that at a small supplier level, as well as with terms of payment. From a diversity strand perspective, as I mentioned, that's the work which we are doing. Supply chain for us is really critical because of the, I won't quote the numbers, we're talking tens of billions of procurement that BHP Billiton does on an annual basis. And equally, as you know, in the natural resources company, contracting is a very big part of our workforce as well, in an inclusive way. So making sure that our suppliers and supply chains can mirror our aspirations on diversity and inclusion and bring them along on that journey is the next step. And as I mentioned, we are hoping that that's something that we can benchmark this financial year and start to make a difference from next year onwards.
Okay, we've got two more questions. Lady at the back first, and then the gentleman, two rows ahead of her.
Hi, my name is Shannon. I come from the private banking industry, which is also quite male-dominated. I'm very impressed with what I've heard from Hitachi and BHP Billiton. I would not have known or expected that. I guess my question's a bit directed towards you two. Of course, I'd like to hear from everybody their opinion. In the financial world, there's many corporate social responsibility metrics where they show the more diversified the company is, the actual better the stock performance is. So just purely from a financial perspective, that's a very quantitative measure of success. I wonder though, and it's clear you have to make these changes in many, many different levels, and the commitment from the top is clear. To what extent do you think this sort of naming and shaming on pay in the UK is necessary and effective for maybe some of the companies that aren't quite as advanced as yours are? A little controversial, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, how effective that is as an additional way to get companies to move.
So question for the panel. Vandita, do you want to say something?
Sure, I'm happy to. So we have a very unique perspective in BHP Billiton around this topic, given we are listed both in Australia and in one of the largest in FTSE here. In Australia, we already do pay gap statistics, and we disclose it as part of our annual suite of financials and reports. So just to say that though UK is just getting there, we absolutely as a company support this initiative, and we think if done with the right matrix on a total comp basis, so that apples to apples comparisons across industries can actually be made, it is a very powerful tool. As I mentioned, what gets disclosed gets measured and gets acted upon. Just to give you BHP Billiton statistics, if I'm not wrong, our pay gap is around 3%, which which, as you can see, is probably on the short end. Our remuneration committee at the board level insists that our chief people's officer, who heads our HR, presents level by level pay gap statistics to our board.
Yeah, 3% is low. If we don't have the other gentleman here, I'm just aware of time.
Hi, Billy Howe again. In my day job, I'm a venture capitalist, and actually SOSV, our VC firm, is the #1 seed investor for female-founded startups on the planet. And my question is, you mentioned in your application processes that you changed the language. And I would love it if you could give me some specific examples, because, you know, we're all about that, so.
Certainly, and you know, if we do want to talk about real specifics, then maybe we can hook up afterwards. But what we found was that there were a lot of our roles, in particular in the sales organisation, where we were talking about hard targets and we were talking about percentage achievements. We weren't really talking about the requirement for high collaboration capabilities. We weren't talking about the team working aspects as much, all of which are super critical. But traditionally in hiring for salespeople, you go for did you overachieve your number year on year? So we've changed that, and we've talked more about the requirement for virtual teaming, collaboration, and we've certainly started to see more CVs coming in. When I was hiring a couple of years ago for both sales and technical support for sales, I rarely saw an application from a female, however experienced, across the business. We do now see that. Our UK sales director is female. She's been in the business for 5 years, so started running one small sales team, now runs the UK sales operation. We're also privileged to have a country manager in Denmark who's female, and about 80% of her overall team are female. And I think the cultural aspect of it, as well as how you language and prioritise the communications, does make a big difference. But that's one piece that we felt we could take control of without having to spend, without a specific ROI, a lot of money. And it has had a desired effect. So, yeah, we're really pleased with the way that worked.
Lady here in the red.
Hi there, Dawn Bonfield. I was interested that you mentioned the data scientist. I actually phoned, I'm working on a careers pack, which is a kind of nudge thing for 16, 17-year-olds at the moment, and they're doing something very similar in Ireland. And the guy in Ireland said data scientist is one of the key jobs for the future. So when I phoned up the government careers advisory place and said, can you tell me what information you have on data scientist? He didn't have the first idea what I was talking about. So when are we, as I'm an engineer, so when are we as engineering companies going to get together and do something on this careers piece that is so desperately missing? Because you're doing some fantastic work, but we're missing that bit from 16, 17 and 18 when people, girls especially, are trying to actually choose real careers. We're not getting together and doing something to provide that. So
you were saying you think it's companies who should be doing it rather than leaving it to the government?
Yeah.
And I think it has to be both, quite frankly. You know, I think there's a lot of grassroots initiatives in place.
But I guess what you're doing up north near
Yes.
Sunderland with the University of Sunderland is an example of this, because
that's a prime example. But on a smaller scale as well, you know, we chose to work with Beaconsfield High School at HDS. They're 15 miles from the office. So we wanted to do something that was very community related as well. Through, I think, organisations like WISE, that's a great opportunity for education, government and companies to come together. And also just taking action and doing it yourself locally. You know, that's not the ideal way because it takes longer and it's a smaller footprint initially, but the first step is the hardest. So that's what I would encourage is those forums. And we do actually see quite a lot of schools and colleges now reaching out to local businesses to kickstart that process. And a couple of schools, I think in the Maidenhead area, for instance, reached out to a lot of local businesses and said, we're going to have a careers fair, do come along, but we're really interested in not the normal, not the traditional, not the well-known jobs that we have available. So we have to do it from both sides, I think.
I've got the signal that we have time for one final round of questions. I know we have a question here, and the mic is on its way. And if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sony Kaur and I work at Lloyds Bank. I've got a bit more of a personal question. I recently got promoted, and I like to think it was because of my hard work, my leadership, but I still can't help but feel that others perceive it because I'm female, because I'm Asian, and Lloyds have openly come out with a target to promote women. They need to have 40% of women in senior roles. How do we overcome that?
Very good question.
Can I
There's a part of me which says, does it matter in a way? I mean, I kind of think just, get your foot in the door, climb up. But Lynn,
And I think that's a huge part of it, because one of the things that we all find, perhaps sometimes as females, is that we got the job because of something else other than our capabilities. Go out there, girl, and tell them it was for your capabilities. Yes. Showcase the outcomes. There may be other people that think that, but just always be showing them through your communication, your leadership skills, through your proactive engagement of others to get promoted. Absolutely take the moral high ground on that. You were promoted for your leadership and your capabilities. Don't forget that. Hold that dear in your heart.
Yeah, and I think no apologies. Yeah, we apologize too much for being too good. I think last thing we have to do is start apologizing for being good at what we do and getting finally recognized for it. So no apologies, do the outcomes and let the outcomes speak for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, if you turn your kind of thinking on its head, you would say, well, do we think that the fact that, every element of public life, of commercial, government is male-dominated, medical, do we think that that is because men are cleverer, or do we think that there are other reasons, perhaps, kind of centuries of ways of thinking? And so if you put it on its head, I guess what a lot of people are trying to do is to redress all of those sort of centuries of supposition, whether it be about women or ethnic minorities.
Having said that, I think there is a need for having open conversations in workplace. You can't shove this under the carpet, because then it doesn't work.
How would you do that? I mean, would you actually? I mean, I don't know if anyone has said anything to you, or it's more that you wonder.
I think my manager always says because of my hard work, my merit, but I can't help but feel because of male counterpart in my team, they would feel as if they've been neglected or put aside because it's not female.
So I guess if someone doesn't say anything explicitly, how do you address it? And if someone does say it explicitly, which occasionally happens?
If someone says explicitly, I think it's easier because you can have a logical conversation around it. If someone doesn't, create work environment in such a way that inclusion becomes part of the conversation. Like we talk about being a parent, like we talk about flexible work that not only women but men seek. They want to go to a sports day as well sometimes. Have that conversation, and I think more we talk about inclusion and diversity as part of normal conversation and not just as thematic, the easier it becomes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm very aware of time, so I think that there are a number of themes that have come out throughout the morning. Something about open conversations, something about the importance of sponsors, and I was intrigued to hear what Professor MacDonald said about the importance of fathers of daughters, because I think you and I were chatting and you said your CEO has got daughters. Our CEO, Deloitte, is really pushing both on social mobility and on gender equality, and our CEO has got 2 daughters. So there is a bit of a pattern here. The importance of role models, although maybe it has to be a composite, maybe we don't have enough women that there is sort of a single woman who kind of is the superwoman that does it all. Something about tackling stereotypes. What we didn't get into a huge amount was something that I think is important, which is the personal dimension. And I certainly see a lot of hunger from women when I talk to them about seeing the whole picture. And, I think there is a curiosity about personal life. It often comes up. I mean, I think people are curious about whether senior women are married or not married, divorced, whether they're mothers, how many children, who minds the children. And it's intriguing, actually. I met a CEO, very high-profile CEO, and she remarked that most of the FTSE CEOs who are women, their husbands are stay-at-home and supportive. So which actually combats the whole idea that, that there is a single individual doing everything. You may have it all, but not necessarily do it all. So it just remains for me to thank Asia House and to thank the Embassy of Japan and to hand over to Samantha to wrap up. Thank you.
I will just extend those thanks to Margaret and to all of our speakers today, including those this morning. If you will join me in thanking everybody and their insights.